you go? What do you do when life turns upside down? You took a huge risk, and now it looks like it was all for naught. You chose to walk a different path, but now it looks like it's turned out to be just another dead end. You thought you could handle this new and different challenge, but it turns out you're not the person you imagined yourself to be. Well, Simon Peter, the rock, as Jesus had named him, decided to do what many do. He returned to what was familiar, what was routine. He went back to the Sea of Tiberias and he went fishing. He'd been a fisherman when he met Jesus. But for Jesus, he had laid down his nets thinking he could become something else. Jesus had called him, told him to follow him. For some crazy reason, he'd done just that. Only now it seemed even crazier than it had back then. The one he had decided to follow had met this ugly, gruesome death, and even though he'd actually seen Jesus after his death, actually met his resurrected presence, he had no idea what following now meant. How do you follow someone who is here and then not here? Here again and not here again? Besides, Peter had learned the hard way that he wasn't very good at following faithfully. Not if the path got too difficult, not if the journey might prove to be too costly. So he dragged his confused, somewhat cowardly self out of Jerusalem, and he returned to what he knew. He returned to that which was familiar, and he brought along some of his friends as well. They'd been fishing. The early verses tell us, or at least they've been going through the motions of fishing all night long, and they caught nothing. Was this another thing that Peter thought that he was going to have to admit that he simply wasn't good at? Maybe over that time he'd been following Jesus, he had lost the skills, or maybe his heart just wasn't in it anymore. Was he just going to have to live tangled up in his failure, caught up in his nets of self-doubt and self-loathing? What kind of man was he anyway? He'd vowed his love, he'd vowed his loyalty to his Lord, his master, his teacher, his friend. When trouble came, he turned tail and run. He'd done that which he claimed he'd never do. He committed in what his eyes was the unforgivable. He turned his back on his friend Jesus. How does someone live with the knowledge that deep down that's the kind of person you are? So throwing the nets and hauling them in were probably good for Peter. They were so routine, so second nature that he probably didn't even have to give much thought to what he was doing. Instead, he could sit there in the boat and unfortunately, he could focus on his failures, and his shortcomings, his flaws, and his weaknesses. You know, that's one of the good things about doing things the way you've always done them before. You don't have to think about them very much, right? Things become kind of rote. You can go through the motions while your mind wanders to 1,000 different places. I mean, there's really not a lot of challenge in the routine. It doesn't stretch you to grow. It doesn't have those growing edges. It doesn't force you to get creative and allow spontaneity, and even doesn't even force you to give much thought to what you're doing or why. It leaves you with a lot of time to think. True, it may not bring results, and maybe it'll be good enough to get by, but it leaves you with lots of times to think. And Sometimes that's a good thing, and other times, like this time with Peter, that's not always such a desired thing. Peter and his friends had spent all night fishing, without fishing the way they'd always fished. Yet this time they had caught nothing. Oh well, they probably thought, we've still got some reserves back at home. We'll try again tonight, and hey, it might take us a while to get back in the swing of this fishing business. We've been away for a while. I know we've fished before, and we made a good living at it. It was good enough work. Pretty sure it'll work again. Then this stranger on the shore yells and interrupts those conversations they're having inside their own head. Wants to know if they caught him. No, nothing. Not a very good night, they holler back. Then suddenly this stranger on the shore is offering a suggestion. Why don't you try the other side of the boat? Peter and those others are thinking, who does this guy think he is? If he knows so much, why doesn't he get out of here and try this? See how good he knows, how good he is, how much he knows about fishing. But you know what? It can't hurt to try something different. What do we got to lose? So they toss the nets on the other side. And John, as John is so good at doing, describes the catch in very metaphorical terms. He said they caught a specific number of fish, 153 to be exact. Well, that's as many as there were nations in the known world at that time. Any way you look at it, it's an earth-shattering, mind-boggling catch. And in that miraculous multitude of fish, they came to understand that it was Jesus who was there with them, directing their actions, still caring for them, looking out for them, loving them. The resurrected Jesus had prepared a fire there on the shore. And so once again, they share a meal with the one who loves them more than they can ever imagine. And as they eat and talk, I can imagine Jesus checking up on each one of them, asking how they're doing, you know, the things that Jesus would do, right? And I can also imagine Peter kind of sitting a little farther away from the rest, farther away than he usually would have been. Maybe he can't even bring himself to look Jesus in the eye. I mean, after all, he has to be racked with guilt and shame. But he'd given Jesus his word. And then he had proved that his word was not to be trusted. Have you ever done that? It's not a very good feeling, is it? Perhaps Peter held his breath, just waiting for Jesus to finally call him out, to humiliate him, to reprimand him right there in front of all the rest. Some rock he was. Shoot, he crumbled under pressure. Yet I can see Jesus quietly laying a hand on Peter's shoulder and saying, Peter, come on, take a walk, will you? And so they stroll along the beach, unspoken words kind of hanging there between them. Or maybe he sends the others away and they just sit there around the fire in silence until Jesus finally looks up and looks Peter square in the face and says, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? Do you love me more than these things from the life you knew before you met me? Do you love these fish, these nets, these rocks, the sand, the waves? Do you love all this more than me? Which is it, Simon? Yes, Lord. You know that I love you. And feed my lambs. 2 more times Jesus asks Peter if he loves him. And 2 more times Peter gets the chance to make right those earlier denial, those earlier denials, those earlier betrayals, if you will. And this time, rather than a cock crowing, I'm pretty sure there were tears that were flowing. Peter had just been through his resurrection rehabilitation, if you will. Peter, the rock, I'm not through with you yet. This fishing stuff, won't you come back and fish for people again? Come on, Peter, won't you follow me? Some of you I know, because I've sat through surgeries that you were having, know what it means to go through rehabilitation. Mel, I think you're one of our last. You know how it feels, right? You have a knee replaced or a hip replaced or some kind of surgery where you either lose a part of you or you have one replaced with something artificial. And when it's all said and done, you kind of have to learn how to make your body work with the alterations that have taken place. You have to rehab. And then there are people, maybe some of you, certainly people you know, who find themselves dependent on substances of one kind or another. And they have to go through the process of learning how to function again without the alcohol, without the drugs. To rehabilitate means to restore to a former capacity or to reinstate. To restore or bring to a condition of health or useful and constructive activity. I love that definition. Peter, after the crucifixion and the resurrection, when he realized what he had done that night in the courtyard, Peter needed to be restored. He needed to be brought back again to good spiritual health so that he would once again be useful and constructive as he went about helping build the kingdom of God that Jesus came to teach us so much about. And as we learn from this story, Peter did just that. History tells us that he lived and even died a martyr's death, spreading the good news of the gospel of Jesus the Christ and God's love for each of us. Peter had to be rehabilitated, if you will. And I think that's often true for us, isn't it? Now, I don't think that resurrection rehab, if you want to call it that, works instantaneously. Like Peter, I think many of us have to learn to forgive ourselves even after we've made amends and been forgiven by the person we hurt or offended. I wonder how many times Peter would lie awake at night wondering if he'd ever do that again, deny Jesus again. Would he give in to temptation and take the safe way rather than the way God was directing him? Even after that encounter on the seashore, I'm sure there were nights that Peter lay there in bed, unable to sleep, and wondered, am I capable of doing that again? Or have I somehow gotten past that? But then each time those troubling thoughts came to him, Peter could also remember that oh too important day, that event on the seashore, when Jesus said, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And he answered, yes, Lord, you know that I do. And Jesus said, then tend my sheep. I dare say there are what Dr. Teresa Fry Brown calls Peter moments in all of our lives. Times when we disappoint Jesus. Times when we do exactly what we said we'd never do again or never do in the first place. Times when we like the idea of being like Jesus more than we like actually being like Jesus. Times that may cause us to end up doubting our self-worth, our worth before God. Times when we end up wondering if we are forgivable or even lovable, even to God. In those moments, those Peter moments, may we remember that God knows our hearts. God loves us as we are. And it was for us that God sent Jesus. So perhaps all of us as individuals, maybe as a congregation, could use a little rehabilitation time with Jesus. Maybe we need to ask ourselves those hard questions. Have we returned to the routine because it's what we know, it's easier? Have we given up on ourselves because somehow we think we don't deserve forgiveness? Have we become discouraged and disappointed with ourselves or perhaps with those around us? Maybe we're not the people we dream we can be. Maybe we're not the church we hope to be. Yes, we make mistakes. We get depressed. We get discouraged. We end up simply going through the motions sometimes. But there in the distance, do you see him? Do you hear him? He's still alive.